You're listening to Built for Nature, an exploration of how humans are designed to live through first principles, light, water, magnetism, and the deeper forces that shape human biology. Today's episode is part one of a three-part series about deuterium. The inspiration for this episode comes from the book Defeating Cancer, the Biological Effect of Deuterium Depletion by Hungarian doctor and researcher Gábor Somlyai. And the core idea expands on what we discussed in the fourth phase of water episode. Not all water is the same. And the type of hydrogen inside water influences energy production, cellular function, and disease. So first, what is deuterium? Most hydrogen atoms contain one proton and no neutron. That's ordinary hydrogen. But a small percentage of hydrogen atoms contain one proton and one neutron. This heavier form of hydrogen is called deuterium. It exists naturally in water, food, and the environment. So every day you consume some amount of deuterium. And the question Somlyai asks is, does too much deuterium create problems inside biological systems? The answer is yes, it does, and over these next three episodes, we're going to dive into it. Since deuterium is heavier than ordinary hydrogen, it behaves differently. And as we've learned, biology often depends on precision. Tiny differences matter when reactions are happening at the molecular level, especially inside mitochondria. As we discussed in episode 6, when we dove into Nick Lane's book, Power, Sex, Suicide, mitochondria rely on hydrogen movement, proton gradients, and electron flow to generate ATP. And if heavier hydrogen behaves differently inside that system, it could influence efficiency. And this is where the conversation starts to connect back to something we've already explored in episode 13, what causes cancer. Somlyai's core thesis is that excess deuterium interferes with mitochondrial function, especially at the level of ATP synthase, the rotary molecular machine that produces cellular energy. Since that machine evolved to handle lighter hydrogen, too much deuterium creates friction, inefficiency, and stress. Over time, this impairs energy production. Think of ATP synthase like a high-speed turbine. It spins thousands of times a second, relying on the precise flow of protons. Ordinary hydrogen is light and fast. Deuterium, being twice as heavy, moves slower and bonds more tightly. Imagine trying to run that turbine with slightly heavier gears. The friction increases, the speed drops, and the efficiency of the entire power plant suffers. That molecular drag is what Somlyai suggests creates the energetic stress. And when cellular energy declines, the system becomes less stable, which connects to a recurring theme in our series. Disease often follows energetic dysfunction. This connects directly to what we explored in the What Causes Cancer episode, where we looked at cancer not as a purely genetic problem, but as a collapse of cellular order, driven largely by mitochondrial dysfunction. So since deuterium is creating friction inside the very machine that regulates cellular energy and apoptosis, then it becomes another input that can push the system toward the kind of energetic instability we discussed there. Not a cause in isolation, but yet another variable that lowers the threshold. So where does deuterium come from? How does it show up in our cellular water? Well, deuterium is naturally present in all water and food, but the levels your body encounters aren't fixed. They vary depending on your geography, your water source, and critically, your metabolic state. Let's start with the external sources. All water on Earth contains some deuterium, but the concentration varies more than most people would expect. Geography plays a significant role. Water at higher altitudes tends to be naturally lower in deuterium. The reason comes down to how water cycles through the atmosphere. As water vapor moves from the equator toward the poles and from lower to higher elevations, the heavier deuterium-containing molecules fall out of the atmosphere first, as precipitation. What remains, the water that makes it to high altitudes and cold climates, is progressively lighter. This is why high-altitude glacial meltwater and water from mountainous regions tends to have lower deuterium concentrations than water from rivers, reservoirs, and municipal sources at lower elevations. Latitude matters too. Water closer to the equator tends to be higher in deuterium, while water from polar regions tends to be lower. And then there's food. Everything you eat contains hydrogen, and therefore contains some deuterium. But the deuterium content of food varies depending on what the food is and how it was produced. Carbohydrates, particularly processed and refined carbohydrates, carry higher deuterium loads. Animal fats tend to be lower. This is one of the reasons some researchers in this field pay close attention to dietary composition, not just for caloric or macronutrient reasons, but for the isotopic profile of what you're consuming. And this is where the geography of food becomes interesting. The same atmospheric fractionation principle that makes high altitude water lower in deuterium applies to the food grown in the different regions of the world. Plants absorb water from their local environment and incorporate that hydrogen into their structure, which means the deuterium content of a plant is largely a reflection of the deuterium content of the water in the soil it grew in. Tropical fruits are a striking example of this. Fruits like mangoes, pineapples, bananas, and papayas grow near the equator, where both the water and the atmosphere are naturally higher in deuterium, carry some of the highest deuterium concentrations of any whole food. They're also high in sugar, which compounds the effect. So you're getting both a high deuterium load from the isotopic profile of the water they grew in, and a metabolic effect that suppresses the fat oxidation pathways your body uses to manage deuterium internally. This doesn't mean tropical fruits are poison, but it is a genuinely interesting data point when you consider that these are foods humans at northern latitudes would historically have had little or no access to, and that our mitochondria evolved in environments where these foods were simply not part of the picture. Animal fats, by contrast, tend to be lower in deuterium, particularly fats from animals raised in colder climates or at higher elevations where the water those animals consumed was naturally more depleted. This is another layer of the dietary composition argument that goes well beyond conventional nutrition thinking. Drinking water source matters as well. Tap water, depending on where you live, may come from low elevation reservoirs or municipal treatment systems that don't account for deuterium content at all. Naturally sourced spring water from higher elevations is generally a better option from this perspective. Now here's where it gets more interesting and more personal. The deuterium your body encounters isn't just determined by what comes in from the outside. It's also shaped by what your body does with what it takes in. High altitude water sources tend to be naturally lower in deuterium, deep glacier meltwater as well. But the more interesting variable is internal. How your body handles deuterium depends significantly on how well your metabolism is functioning. Diets high in processed carbohydrates impair the body's ability to manage deuterium efficiently, while robust fat metabolism helps generate lower deuterium water internally. We'll go deeper on the practical side of this in episode 17, part 3 of this series. One of the most interesting parts of Somlyai's work is how he reframes cancer. The standard model says cancer is fundamentally a genetic problem. Mutations accumulate, cells lose control, and the disease takes hold. And we covered this in depth in episode 13, where we explored how that explanation, while not wrong, is incomplete. Somlyai pushes that argument even further. His position is that the metabolic environment of the cell comes first, not the mutation. The mutation is often a downstream consequence of a cell that has already lost energetic stability. A cell under chronic energetic stress is one where mitochondrial function is impaired, where ATP production is inefficient, and where redox balance has shifted. This is a cell that is struggling to maintain normal regulatory function, causing DNA repair to slow and apoptosis signaling weakens. These are the checkpoints that normally catch and eliminate damaged cells, and they now have become significantly less reliable. Deuterium is one of the inputs that contributes to that energetic stress. When the molecular machinery of the mitochondria is grinding against heavier hydrogen isotopes over years and decades, the cumulative inefficiency adds up. And this is where the compound effect works against you. What you're left with is a cell that isn't getting the energy it needs to police itself properly. And that is where cancer finds its opening. This book also returns us to a major theme from the fourth phase of water. Water is not just background material. It is active infrastructure inside life. Dr. Jared Pollack demonstrated that water inside living systems doesn't just sit there passively. It organizes itself into structured layers near biological surfaces, proteins, membranes, collagen, forming what he called exclusion zone water, or easy water. This structured water holds electrical charge. It facilitates the movement of ions and protons. It shapes how proteins fold and function. It supports the charge separation that drives cellular energy processes. In other words, water is not the stage on which biology happens. It is part of the performance itself. Now layer deuterium into that picture. Deuterium doesn't just slow down ATP synthase. It affects water structure more broadly. Because deuterium forms stronger hydrogen bonds than ordinary hydrogen, it can alter the way water organizes itself near biological surfaces. The structured water layers that Pollock describes, the ones that store energy and support cellular function, become compromised when deuterium concentrations shift. Think about what that means in practice. If your easy water is disrupted, the electrical gradients that cells depend on become less stable. Protein function becomes less precise, ion movement becomes less efficient, the entire infrastructure that supports cellular order begins to degrade quietly in the background. This is why the isotopic makeup of water isn't just a technicality. It's an order versus disorder question, and it connects directly to something Dr. Robert O. Becker showed us in The Body Electric. That life depends on subtle electrical gradients running through tissues and cells. Those gradients don't exist in isolation. They depend on the medium they move through, and that medium is water. Change the water, even subtly, and you change the conditions that everything else depends on. So when the isotopic makeup of water shifts, meaning the ratio of ordinary hydrogen to deuterium rises, your biology responds. Change the medium, and you change everything that depends on it. When you combine this book with some of the others we've studied, the pattern becomes undeniable. Let's step back for a moment and look at what we actually built across the series. Nick Lane showed us that mitochondria are the engines of complex life and that energy production is not incidental to biology, it is the foundation of it. Gerald Pollack showed us that water is not passive. It organizes, holds charge, and actively participates in the energetic processes cells depend on. Robert Becker showed us that life runs on subtle electrical gradients and that anything disrupting those gradients disrupts the system that maintains biological order. Roland Van Wyck showed us that healthy cells emit coherent light and that the order or disorder of those biophoton emissions reflects the organizational state of the entire biological system. When the system is stable, the signal is coherent. When the system is under stress, the signal becomes noise, and that's where we see disease. And now Somlyai is showing us that the specific isotopic composition of the hydrogen inside our cellular water, something most biologists have never even thought to measure, influences how well all those systems function. These are not 5 separate ideas. They are 5 layers of the same idea. Life is precision energy management. And precision energy management is sensitive to inputs at every level, including ones we once considered too small to matter. I encourage everyone to explore further in Somlyai's original text and look for emergent studies on deuterium, depletion, and metabolic health. The intersection of physics, chemistry, and biology is where the next breakthroughs often hide. Now, the body is not just random chemistry. It is structured, regulated, and sensitive at levels most people never think to look. And the deeper we go, the more that same conclusion keeps surfacing. Support your mitochondria. Protect your cellular environment. Give your biology the conditions it evolved to run in. In the next episode, we go deeper into Somlyai's follow-up work and the most surprising idea in the whole deuterium conversation, that your mitochondria are not just producing energy. They also actively filter and manage the isotopic quality of the water inside your cells. This continues to reframe mitochondria as the most important piece of human biology. Thanks for listening.